when I saw the question, when did Western civilization begin, I realized the answer is, of course, complex, and we're engaged all day today in a conference dedicated to the even bigger question, what is Western civilization? In fact, it's difficult to say, as the speakers so far have indicated, which of these questions is more fundamental. There are plausible points of departure, innovations, influences that contributed to the beginning and flourishing of Western civilization. So I will just make an assertion that is more simple. I will just say that a beginning point for Western civilization is Socrates. Socrates is the founder of political and moral philosophy and ultimately political science and the introduction, and he introduced what we call Socratic rationalism into the world, which I argue is the beginning of a new way of thinking that provides a foundation for the logos, the rational speech of Western civilization, our ability to investigate and examine the natural and human world, the way we converse about ourselves, the way we seek self-knowledge, the way we live together in cities and states, and the way we talk about our place in the whole universe. The argument is, of course, not original with me. Cicero said that, quote, Socrates, however, was the first who called philosophy down from heaven and placed it in cities and introduced it even in homes and drove it to inquire about life and customs and things good and evil. John Stuart Mill said of Socrates, quote, mankind can hardly be too often reminded that there was once a man called Socrates, between whom and the legal authorities and public opinion of his time there took place a memorable collision. Born in an age and country abounding with individual greatness, this man has been handed down to us by those who best knew him, both him and the age, as the most virtuous man in it, while we know him as the head and prototype of all subsequent teachers of virtue, the source equally of the lofty inspiration of Plato and the judicious utilitarianism of Aristotle, the two headsprings of ethical as of all philosophy. This acknowledged master of all the eminent thinkers who have since lived, whose fame still growing after more than 2,000 years, all but outweighs the whole remainder of the names which make his native city illustrious, was put to death by his countrymen. And then, of course, there is Nietzsche, who identifies in Socrates the one turning point and vortex of so-called history. These three eminent thinkers themselves all perceive Socrates as a turning point in human history, an innovator in the realm of thought and speech and ideas who changed the world, although they disagree about whether his contribution was for the good. Cicero and John Stuart Mill, yes. Nietzsche, no. To Cicero, we are indebted for the insight that Socrates was the founder of political philosophy, a philosophy that paid attention to what Leo Strauss calls the human things. Prior to Socrates, philosophy was natural philosophy. It was philosophy that concerned itself with discovering and understanding the natural causes of things in the natural world. These so-called pre-Socratic philosophers, to speak anachronistically, were accused of atheism and impiety because they sought to explain away events and occurrences that others ordinarily attributed, to divine causes. Like Aristophanes, Socrates, and the clouds, for example, they believe that clouds and atmospheric activity, ethereal vortex, caused rain and thunder and lightning rather than Zeus. According to Cicero, Socrates made philosophy political and moral. In other words, Socrates made philosophy directly relevant to the good life for human beings. He turned the pursuit of wisdom into the pursuit of knowledge about political life, how to organize cities, and how to distinguish the good for human beings from the bad or the evil. Socrates was the first to ask the what is questions about what the best way of life is for a human being, how human beings should live together in political societies. What is the definition of a city? What is justice? And Socrates did not rest satisfied with pursuing knowledge of what each thing is, but he pursued knowledge of what we would call morality, whether each thing is good, bad, evil, and good for us. So when Socrates asks the question, for example, what is courage, he is not only trying to understand a definition of the virtue of courage per se, but whether courage is good for us and in what ways. In other words, Socrates is interested in the full set of implications of human action in the political realm, and whether a certain way of life is better or more conducive to human goodness and human happiness. This is not to say that Socrates was not at all interested in the heavens or the divine, but Socrates has a way of subjecting even the divine to rational examination and argumentation. By the end of the reform Socrates introduces in the Republic into the just city and speech concerning the divine, the God no longer resembles the anthropomorphic Olympian gods. They are not running around involved in dubious, capricious schemes and shape-changing, but instead they become examples of the good, the steady, and the truthful. Cicero's Socrates points human beings in the direction of the pursuit of knowledge that puts them in great control of their own lives and the lives of their communities. In Socrates' pursuit of understanding about the whole of knowledge, human beings are no longer subjects to the tragic consequences of divine caprice. The exercise of our reason shows us how to live a thoughtful, moderate life in which we also exercise human control of the passions that can lead us astray. Thus, Socratic political philosophy also teaches us to moderate any utopian expectations from political life. Chance and human error and evil are persistent facts of human life, and we cannot expect perfection in that life, according to Socrates. Cicero's Socrates is the first to teach us to pursue wisdom about the good life for human beings and not to look above or beyond ourselves or to rely on anyone else for that understanding but ourselves. And this independent exercise of human reason in pursuit of understanding the human things and the non-human whole is a fundamental characteristic, I would argue, of Western civilization. The idea that human understanding is accessible to us as human beings, even within the context of religion. John Stuart Mill's Socrates stands up for his freedom to pursue knowledge of the divine and nature and of the best arrangement or regime for human beings, even if it eventually puts him on a collision course with Athenian democracy. Mill insists that the truth of every opinion must be subject to examination and argumentation. No one should be allowed to decide a question for others because human beings are not infallible. We are, in fact, capable of error. So every human being must be allowed to hear both or all sides of an argument before deciding for themselves on any given matter. Socrates is, for John Stuart Mill, the human being who above all insisted on teaching or discussing virtue, especially with the young, and teaching them how to examine and argue about virtue, even if it put him on this collision course with his society. For Mill, Socrates is the founder of freedom of thought and a martyr for it, another indispensable distinction of Western thought and civilization. For Nietzsche, Socrates is the turning point or vortex of history because Socratic rationalism brings about the end of the classical or ancient view of the world. Rationalism replaces the Greek understanding of life as dedicated to the pursuit of what is noble and beautiful. Instead, Socratic rationalism redirects human life towards the idea that they can know and pursue what is good for them through a rational process called philosophy, and away from the tragic view that the best they can do is to pursue the noble and honorable things in a world governed by capricious, unknowable gods. So even though Nietzsche regretted the subjection of everything to rational examination as a debasement of human life, he believed Socratic philosophy ushered in this change towards a new, more mundane, if not also more stable way of understanding and living human life, a change of direction that is essential to the beginning and direction of Western civilization. In a free society, the rationalists, those who try to understand the way of the world on the basis of rational argument, always have to contend with the irrational, with partial truth, and with outright ignorance. Socrates teaches us how to do this. Socrates always began every study with a survey and examination of common opinion. Take, for example, justice. Plato's Republic begins with Socrates' examination of three prominent and perennial common opinions about justice. First, that justice is the rule of law, paying one's debts to human beings and the divine, a legal understanding of justice. Second, that justice is doing good to friends and harm to enemies, a political understanding of justice. Third, the third definition of justice is that all justice or legal codes are conventional, and that everyone who establishes legal codes does it to serve their own interests and desires, and not for the common good. In other words, not necessarily justice. Socrates begins with common opinion to demonstrate where the common opinions fall short, and that further discussion and philosophic inquiry is necessary to attain knowledge, or the truth about the subject, here justice, which is the only thing with which we should be satisfied, that is knowledge, or truth. Our task or responsibility in a free society, the sort of society which Western civilization has made possible, remains the same and indebted to Socratic political philosophy and rationalism, to discern the truth from mere opinion and to pursue knowledge through rational discourse and education. We are still tasked with the ascent from Plato's cave, where those who dwell in the cave, which is of course the political realm of the city or the state, are attached to the dominant opinions of their place and time, and often unwilling to consider that their opinions are limited or defective in any way. It is the task of philosophy and philosophic education to introduce students to and pull them through the sort of education that compels them to confront their easy opinions and subject them to the rigorous examination that only a rational, dialectical education can. The sort of liberal education that Socrates introduced into the world and provided to his companions and interlocutors, and which threatened democracy in Athens to the point that they eventually silenced Socrates, remains in tension with American democracy. Although American democracy is, of course, different, a different kind of democracy that legally protects our freedom of speech and thought and inquiry, these freedoms are never entirely without challenge. Democracy will always have a set of opinions that inform its self-understanding, and it will always be the job of the Socratic philosophic education to expose at least those who are willing to listen or be subjected to the education, to examine deeply the questions that make one a truly educated and thoughtful human being, citizen, and even a future leader.